My name is David Morrison. I'm 67 years old, a retired federal prosecutor living in downtown Toronto. For 3 years since my younger brother Thomas died, the emptiness in my condominium has been a constant companion. My nephew Marcus tells me he worries about me living alone at my age. That's why he insists on our monthly dinners at his place in Markham. He says it's to keep me connected to family. But I've learned over the years that when Marcus says he's doing something for my benefit, I should probably check what's really in his pocket. Last Thursday, I was sitting in a conference room at the Canadian Bar Association's annual symposium downtown when my phone vibrated. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a 1 to 800 prefix. I normally don't answer unknown numbers, but something made me step out into the corridor and take the call. Mr. Morrison? The woman's voice was professional, clipped. This is Officer Stephanie Chen from the Canada Revenue Agency, Audit Division. We need to speak with you regarding some discrepancies in your recent tax filings. The blood drained from my face. In 40 years of practicing law, I'd never once had an issue with the CRA. My taxes were simple since retirement, just my pension and some RRSP withdrawals. I filed them myself every April like clockwork. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake, I said, my prosecutor's instinct immediately kicking in. I haven't filed anything unusual. Mr. Morrison, we have 3 years of business loss claims totaling $340,000. These were filed under Morrison Consulting Group, a company registered in your name. The losses have triggered a full audit of your personal returns going back 5 years. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the wall. I don't own any company. I'm retired. I don't run any consulting business. There was a pause. Sir, we have the incorporation documents here. The business was registered in Ontario in 2022, shortly after your brother's passing. The signing officer and sole director is listed as you, David Andrew Morrison, with your social insurance number and home address. That's impossible, I whispered, but even as I said it, something cold and terrible was beginning to form in my mind. That evening, I drove to Marcus and Jennifer's house in Markham. It was one of those new builds in the suburbs, all modern angles and expensive finishes that I'd always found sterile and unwelcoming. Marcus had texted me earlier in the day, as he always did, reminding me about dinner. Can't wait to see you, Uncle David. Jennifer's making your favorite, beef Wellington. I sat in their dining room, the smell of rosemary and garlic heavy in the air. Jennifer, with her practiced smile and designer dress, poured wine into crystal glasses. Marcus, in his casual, expensive sweater, scrolled through his phone, the blue light illuminating his face. Uncle David, Jennifer said, her voice that perfect mix of warmth and condescension. You look tired. Are you sleeping okay? Marcus and I keep saying you should really consider moving somewhere with less upkeep. A nice retirement community, maybe. I was about to respond when my phone rang again. The 1 to 800 number. Officer Chen. I'm so sorry, I said, standing. I need to take this. I walked toward the hallway, and that's when I heard it. As I put the phone to my ear and said, David Morrison speaking, I heard Marcus behind me. He laughed. It was a sharp, nervous bark of a laugh that seemed to echo off the walls of their expensive home. I turned slowly. He was looking at me, and for just a fraction of a second before he controlled his face, I saw it. Pure panic. Then he arranged his features into something approximating concern. Everything okay, Uncle David? He asked, his voice just a bit too loud. Mr. Morrison, Officer Chen was saying in my ear, we need you to come into our office tomorrow morning at 9. We have some documents we need you to review and verify. Yes, I said, not taking my eyes off Marcus. I'll be there. When I ended the call, Marcus was watching me carefully. Too carefully. Problem? He asked. Just the CRA, I said, testing him. Something about an audit. His laugh this time was even more forced. The CRA? Uncle David, those guys are always trying to squeeze people. Don't worry about it. I'm sure it's nothing. You know how bureaucratic they are. Probably just some computer error. But Jennifer had gone very still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. She looked at Marcus, and something passed between them. Something that made my prosecutor's instincts flare to life like an old muscle memory. I made an excuse about not feeling well and left within 20 minutes. As I drove back to my condo, Marcus's laugh kept echoing in my mind. It wasn't the laugh of someone surprised by bad news. It was the laugh of someone caught off guard, scrambling to maintain control of a situation that was suddenly slipping away from them. The next morning, I sat across from Officer Chen in a gray government building on Bay Street. She was a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of the investigators I used to work with. She spread documents across the desk between us. "Mr. Morrison, these are the incorporation papers for Morrison Consulting Group, filed in August 2022. I picked up the first document. There was my name, typed clearly, my sin, my address, and at the bottom, a signature that made my stomach turn. It looked like mine, almost perfect, but I knew my own hand. The capital M had a loop that was slightly too round. The final N in Morrison trailed too far to the right. "This isn't my signature," I said quietly. Officer Chen nodded. "We suspected as much. The technical analysis will confirm it. But that's only the beginning. Morrison Consulting Group has filed losses for 3 consecutive years. Those losses have been claimed against your personal income, resulting in tax refund checks totaling $127,000. "Refund checks I never received," I said. "Exactly. The checks were deposited into a business account at TD Bank. We've subpoenaed the bank records." She slid another document across the desk. "The account was opened in the name of the corporation with you listed as signing authority. But look at the actual signature card." I looked. The signature was the same slightly wrong version of my name, but there was something else. A second signature, smaller, in the corner where witnesses sign. Marcus T. Morrison. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the desk. "Your nephew," Officer Chen said. And it wasn't a question. I drove home in a daze. The Marcus I thought I knew, my brother's son, the boy I'd watched grow up, helped pay for his university education, couldn't be capable of this. But the evidence was there, black and white, undeniable. That afternoon, I did what I should have done years ago. I called my bank and requested copies of all my account statements for the past 3 years. Then I called Service Canada and requested a complete record of all documents filed under my social insurance number. Then I sat at my desk and waited. The bank statements arrived by email within an hour. Everything looked normal at first. My pension deposits, my utility payments, my grocery withdrawals. But then I noticed something. Every few months, there was a small withdrawal, always just under $1,000, always labeled e-transfer. I didn't use e-transfers. I barely understood how they worked. I called the bank's fraud department. The woman who answered took my information and put me on hold. When she came back, her voice had changed, become more serious. "Mr. Morrison, those e-transfers were sent to an email address ending in mxg.co, nsulting@gmail.com. The security question for each transfer was, favorite nephew, and the answer was Marcus. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The small amounts, always under the reporting threshold, carefully structured to avoid automatic flags. But over 3 years, they added up. 4,700 yuan. The Service Canada package arrived 2 days later. Inside was a printout that made my hands shake. It showed every business, every corporate entity registered under my SIN, Morrison Consulting Group, was there. But it wasn't alone. There were 4 other companies. Morrison Advisory Services, DM Holdings Incorporated, Morrison Estate Planning, Morrison Financial Group, all registered between 2022 and 2024. All listing me as director. All. I knew without even checking that I had never heard of. I was 67 years old, a retired prosecutor who had spent his entire career putting criminals behind bars, and I had been systematically victimized by my own nephew. The shame of it was almost worse than the anger. But I wasn't just a victim. I was a federal prosecutor with 40 years of experience building cases, and Marcus had just given me all the evidence I needed. I started with the basics. I pulled out my old filing cabinet, the one with folders from my entire legal career. Deep in the back, I found what I was looking for. The folder labeled Thomas, Estate 2021. My brother's will, death certificate, and all the paperwork from settling his affairs. I remembered that time clearly. Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack, and I'd been devastated. Marcus had stepped in immediately, full of concern, helping me sort through the grief and the paperwork. He'd brought documents for me to sign, explanations of probate procedures, forms for the estate. I'd signed everything he put in front of me, grateful to have family taking care of the details while I mourned my only brother. Looking back now with clear eyes, I could see how he'd done it. Mixed in with legitimate estate documents, he'd buried other papers. Corporate registration forms, banking authorizations, powers of attorney, all requiring my signature, all explained away as necessary for the estate. And I, blinded by grief and trust, had signed them all. I spread the documents across my desk and began cross-referencing dates. Morrison Consulting Group incorporated August 2022. The same month we'd finalized Thomas's estate. The first fraudulent tax return filed March 2023, claiming losses from a business I didn't run, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of what Marcus had done. I hired a forensic accountant, Sandra Chen, who specialized in financial fraud. She was expensive, but I was willing to spend whatever it took. I gave her access to everything: my CRA files, bank statements, the corporate registration documents, all of it. 3 days later, she called me into her office. Her face was grim. "Mr. Morrison, this is sophisticated financial fraud. Your nephew hasn't just been filing false tax returns. He's been building a corporate structure designed to drain your assets systematically over time." She showed me a chart she'd created, lines and boxes connecting all the numbered companies, showing the flow of money. He created these shell companies and used them to file business losses against your personal income. The CRA issued refunds, which went into accounts he controlled. But that's just phase 1. Phase 1? I asked, my mouth dry. Phase 2 is already underway. Look at this. She pulled up a document on her computer. 3 weeks ago, Morrison Consulting Group filed a lien against your condominium. They're claiming you owe the company $450,000 for unpaid consulting fees and expenses. My condo, the home I'd lived in for 20 years, worth close to $1.2 million in Toronto's overheated market. Can he do that? I asked. File a lien based on fake debt? He can file it, Sandra said. Whether it holds up in court is another matter. But here's the problem. He's listed as director of the company, and he has corporate documents with your forged signature authorizing him to act on behalf of Morrison Consulting. Unless you can prove fraud, which takes time, that lien sits there, encumbering your property. You can't sell, can't refinance. You're stuck. What's his endgame? I asked, though I was starting to see it. I think he's planning to force a sale. The company will claim you can't pay the debt, petition to force the sale of your condo to satisfy the lien. As director of the creditor company, he'll have significant influence over how that sale happens. Worst case scenario, he structures it so the company buys your condo at below market value, flips it, and pockets the difference. Best case for him, you panic and agree to sell, and he negotiates a settlement where he takes a significant chunk of your equity. I sat back in my chair, feeling older than my 67 years. My nephew, my brother's son, was trying to steal my home. How long do we have? I asked. Based on the lien filing, I'd say he's planning to initiate forced sale proceedings within 60 days. He needs to wait long enough for it to look legitimate, but not so long that you figure it out and stop him. He's already waited too long, I said quietly. I've figured it out. Sandra smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. Then let's figure out how to destroy him. That night, I sat in my study and did something I hadn't done in 3 years since retirement. I opened my old case files. Not the physical files, those were archived, but the notes, the methodologies, the patterns I'd learned from 4 decades of prosecuting financial crimes. Marcus thought he was clever, but he'd made the same mistakes every white-collar criminal makes. He'd gotten greedy. He'd acted too quickly. And most importantly, he'd left a trail. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. Not emotional notes, not angry accusations. A timeline, a list of evidence, a prosecution strategy. Because that's what this was going to become. A prosecution. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Margaret Okonkwo, who had a reputation as the best litigator in Toronto. She'd been a junior Crown attorney when I was senior counsel, and I'd mentored her early in her career. Now she ran her own firm, specializing in complex fraud cases. "David," she said when I walked into her office, "I heard you retired. What brings you downtown?" I handed her a folder. "I need to destroy my nephew." She raised an eyebrow, opened the folder, and started reading. I watched her face change as she went through the documents. The forged signatures, the shell companies, the tax fraud, the lien. When she finished, she looked up at me. "This is criminal fraud, multiple counts, forgery, identity theft, tax evasion. David, why are you coming to me instead of going straight to the police?" "Because I don't want him arrested," I said. "Not yet. I want him ruined first." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Tell me what you're thinking." "Marcus thinks he's been clever. He thinks I'm just a lonely old man who's lost his edge. He thinks the lien will panic me into settling, giving him a payout. He has no idea I've discovered the full scope of what he's done. That's our advantage." "Go on," she said. "We don't confront him. We let him think his plan is working. Meanwhile, we build an ironclad case. We get the forensic evidence on the forgeries. We document every fraudulent transaction. We work with the CRA to show the pattern of fake losses. And here's the key part. We identify every single asset he bought with my stolen money." Margaret's eyes lit up. "Civil forfeiture." "Exactly. We don't just want him charged criminally. We want a civil judgment that seizes everything he bought with my money. His house, his cars, his investments, all of it. We want him financially destroyed before he ever sees the inside of a courtroom." "That's cold, David," Margaret said, but she was smiling. "I love it." Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret's firm became a war room. We hired a second forensic accountant. We brought in a documents examiner to analyze the forged signatures. We worked with the CRA investigator to cross-reference every transaction. We traced every dollar Marcus had stolen and documented everything he'd purchased. The picture that emerged was damning. The house in Markham, purchased 2022, down payment of $180,000 that came from the first fraudulent tax refund. Jennifer's BMW, bought with an e-transfer from my account. A cottage in Muskoka, purchased through one of the shell companies. Investment accounts, RRSPs, all funded with my stolen money. But we needed one more thing. We needed Marcus to incriminate himself. "We need him on record admitting to the companies," Margaret said. "Right now, he can claim someone else forged your signature in his. We need him to acknowledge he created these entities." I thought about it. He thinks I don't know. What if I ask for his help? Margaret looked at me sharply. "You want to wear a wire?" "I want to have dinner with my nephew," I said. "And I want to record every word." The following Sunday, I drove to Marcus's house in Markham. In my jacket pocket was a small recording device, perfectly legal in Ontario, where only one party needs to consent to recording. That party was me. Jennifer opened the door, her smile as artificial as ever. "David, we weren't expecting you," Marcus said. "You canceled." "Change of plans," I said, walking past her into their house. "I need to talk to Marcus. It's important." He appeared from upstairs, his face carefully neutral. "Uncle David, what's wrong?" "I got audited," I said, letting my voice sound tired, defeated. "The CRA says I owe them money from some business I supposedly run. I don't understand any of it." "Marcus, you helped me with all the paperwork after your father died. Did I accidentally sign something I shouldn't have?" I watched his face carefully. There was a flicker of relief, quickly suppressed. He thought I was confused, not suspicious. "Uncle David," he said, his voice full of manufactured concern. "You're not getting any younger. It's possible you just forgot. These things happen. Why don't we sit down and I'll help you sort it out?" We sat at his dining room table. He pulled out a laptop. "Tell me exactly what the CRA said," he prompted. Something about business losses. Companies with my name on them. Morrison Consulting Group, Morrison Advisory, a few others. I watched him. Do those names mean anything to you? He said, typing. Morrison Consulting Group. Yes, I remember that. Uncle David, we set that up to help manage your pension income more efficiently, for tax purposes. Don't you remember? We discussed it right after Dad died. We did? I said, making my voice uncertain. Yes, absolutely. And the others, those were all part of the same estate planning strategy. Nothing to worry about. The losses are just on paper. They're legitimate business expenses that reduce your tax burden. It's perfectly legal. But the CRA seems concerned, I pressed. The CRA is always concerned, Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge of condescension. That's their job. Look, Uncle David, don't worry about this. I'll handle it for you. I'll call them, explain the situation. You don't need to stress about complicated financial matters. That's what family is for. You'll handle it? I asked. Of course. I'm the director of those companies anyway, on your behalf. I have signing authority. I can deal with the CRA directly, sort out whatever confusion there is. I had him. On tape. Admitting he created the companies. Admitting he had signing authority. Admitting he'd been managing my financial affairs without my knowledge. That's such a relief, I said, standing up. Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what I'd do without you. His smile was condescending. That's what family is for, Uncle David. As I drove away, I felt nothing. No anger, no betrayal, just cold, professional satisfaction. I had my evidence. 2 days later, Margaret and I walked into the offices of Marcus's employer, a mid-sized financial services firm downtown. We requested a meeting with the compliance officer and the firm's general counsel. We laid out the evidence. The forged documents, the shell companies, the fraudulent tax filings, all committed by one of their licensed financial advisors. The compliance officer went pale. If this is true, Marcus Morrison will lose his license. Our firm could face regulatory sanctions. It's true, Margaret said. And it gets worse. He used his position as a licensed advisor to gain his victims' trust. That's aggravating fraud. What do you want? The general counsel asked. Cooperation, I said. Fire him today. Provide us with all records of his employment, his client interactions, everything. If he's done this to me, he may have done it to others. They agreed immediately. 2 hours later, Marcus received a call terminating his employment, effective immediately. That evening, my phone rang. Marcus, Uncle David, his voice was strained. I just got fired. Some bullshit about a compliance review. I think they're trying to screw me out of my commissions. Can you believe it? That's terrible, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I might need to borrow some money to tide me over, just until I get sorted with a new firm. Maybe 20,000? 30? I know you have it, Uncle David. You're living on that huge pension, barely spending anything. The audacity was breathtaking. Let me think about it, I said, and ended the call. The next morning, Margaret filed our lawsuit, not against Marcus directly, but against all 5 shell companies he'd created. We sued for fraudulent conveyance, seeking to void every transaction, every transfer, every asset purchase made with my stolen money. We also filed a complaint with the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit and provided them with our complete evidence package. And we filed an emergency motion to freeze all of Marcus's assets, pending the outcome of the litigation. The freeze hit his accounts at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 9:30, my phone was ringing. Marcus. What did you do? He screamed into the phone. My accounts are frozen. Jennifer can't access our mortgage payment. What did you do? I found out, I said calmly. I found all of it, Marcus. The companies, the forgeries, the tax fraud, all of it. There was silence on the other end. Then, Uncle David, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, I said. You stole from me. You forged my signature. You created fake companies to drain my accounts and claim fraudulent tax refunds. You put a lien on my home. You did all of this while pretending to care about me, while using your father's death to gain my trust. I needed the money, he said, his voice cracking. The business was failing. We were going to lose everything. You don't even need it. You're old, you're alone, you have no one to leave it to anyway. And there it was, the truth. To Marcus, I wasn't his uncle. I was just an obstacle between him and money he felt entitled to. You're right about one thing, I said. I am alone. Your father was my only family, and when he died, you were all I had left. But you weren't family, Marcus. You were just a thief, waiting for an opportunity. I hung up. The legal process moved faster than I expected. The evidence was overwhelming. The documents examiner confirmed the forgeries. The CRA provided documentation of the fraudulent tax returns. The forensic accountants traced every dollar. Marcus hired a lawyer, some desperate solo practitioner who clearly knew he was defending the indefensible. They tried to claim I had authorized everything, that I'd agreed to the corporate structure, that my memory was faulty. Margaret destroyed them in court. She presented the recordings, the timeline, the evidence that I'd never even known about the companies until the CRA audit. She showed the pattern of small withdrawals designed to avoid detection, the staged timing of the fraudulent transactions. The judge wasn't sympathetic. "Mr. Morrison," she said, looking at Marcus from the bench, "you exploited your uncle's grief over his brother's death to perpetrate a systematic fraud. You abused familial trust, forged legal documents, and attempted to steal his home. This court finds your conduct reprehensible." The civil judgment was devastating. Every asset Marcus had purchased with my money was forfeit. The house in Markham, gone. The BMW, the cottage, the investments, all seized. The total judgment was $847,000. Everything he'd stolen, plus punitive damages. But the criminal case was worse. The Crown prosecutor, energized by our complete evidence package, charged Marcus with 14 counts: identity theft, fraud, over $5,000, forgery, uttering forged documents, and tax evasion. He pled guilty to avoid trial. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison. Jennifer divorced him before he started serving his sentence. 6 months later, I sat in my condo, looking out over Toronto's skyline. The lien on my home had been removed. My credit was restored. The CRA had reversed all the fraudulent returns and actually owed me a small refund. I had recovered most of the stolen money. The sale of Marcus's assets had brought in enough to cover what he'd taken, though some had been spent and was gone forever. But the money wasn't really the point. The point was that Marcus had seen me as weak, as someone to be exploited. He'd thought my age, my grief, my trust made me vulnerable. He'd forgotten what I'd spent 40 years doing. I'd built careers prosecuting people exactly like him. People who thought they were smarter than everyone else, who thought they could manipulate the system, who believed their victims wouldn't fight back. I'd taught him a lesson that would follow him for the rest of his life. Never underestimate a prosecutor, even a retired one. The other day, I got a letter. It was from Marcus, forwarded from the prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dear Uncle David," it began, "I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I was desperate, and I made terrible choices. I destroyed my life, my marriage, and the one family connection I had left. I think about Dad every day, and I know he would be ashamed of me. You spent your whole life fighting for justice, and I became exactly the kind of person you put away. I'll live with that forever." I read it twice, then put it in my desk drawer. Maybe someday I'd respond, but not today. Today, I had a meeting with the Canadian Bar Association. They'd asked me to speak at a symposium about elder financial abuse, to share my experience and help educate others. Because that's the final lesson Marcus taught me. This happens more often than anyone wants to admit. Children stealing from parents, nephews defrauding uncles, family members exploiting trust for financial gain. But it doesn't have to end with the victim in ruin. Sometimes, if you have the knowledge, the resources, and the determination, it can end with justice. What would you have done in my situation?